with the silence coming, a warm welcome to this day's Atlas seminar series. I apologize for not being here last time with Tim Shea's lecture, but I'm now back in full measure, and I'm very happy to introduce the speaker of this evening, Mr. Evan Levine, who has received his BA in Classics in 2012 at Kalamazoo College in Michigan. And then in 2016, in the same year, he received both an MA in Classics, specializing in Greek archaeology and Greek epigraphy, as well as a Master of Science in the Geosciences, specializing in GIS technology, with a thesis entitled A Geospatial Contextualization of Archaic Greek Epigram on Naxos, already then signaling a very clear path, at least in my mind, that has perhaps shaped his professional career until today. From 2019 to 2020, he was then a John Williams White Fellow at the American School of Classical Studies here in Athens, where he then also served as a digital humanities specialist from 2020 to 2021. And after working as an assistant director of global programming at Norfolk Academy in Virginia from 21 to 23, he has then been based at Copenhagen University as a PhD fellow within the Materiality of Incarceration in Mediterranean Antiquity project, or in short, the PRISON project, where he is working. He is currently working on a PhD thesis dealing with the archaeology of exile and imprisonment on Cycladic islands, a work that is currently entitled Giagos and the Archaeology of Cycladic Exile. And this brings us to his very general research interest, which is, very broadly speaking, I guess, in Cycladic and island archaeology, regional survey and landscape archaeology, so touching upon the core themes of the Atlas seminar, the history of incarceration, archaeological GIS, remote sensing and spatial statistics, and more general themes pertaining to digital humanities. But his work is by no means purely desktop-based, but is very much centered around very active fieldwork, specifically regional survey and landscape archaeological projects. That being said, fieldwork has brought Evan Levine from the US to England, Jordan, Sudan, and most importantly in our context today, also to Greece. Specifically as a survey and GIS specialist, he worked in the Mazi Plain within the Mazi Archaeological Project, on Samothraki within the Samothrace Archaeological Project, Kouroi Archaeological Project, and since 2019, he is a senior staff member of the Small Cycladic Islands Project, which Alex Nodell presented, I believe, last year within the Atlas seminar as well, and of the Paros Paleopagos Archaeological Project since 2024. And finally, since 2023, he is the project co-director of the Naxos Kouroi project, which is the subject of his talk today and this evening. And if you are further interested in the work of Evan Levine, I highly advise you to browse through his already very long list of publications, which lists his numerous authored and co-authored works, often dealing with topics related to regional survey and landscape archaeology in Greece and other parts of the ancient world, GIS and remote sensing approaches, as well as other themes dealing very generally with the digital humanities. But I think Evan Levine is best to speak about his current work, now specifically dealing with complex landscapes in Colossal Kouroi on the island of Naxos. So Evan, thank you very much for accepting our invitation to the seminar, and we're very much looking forward to your talk. Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks, Will, and thanks, Tina, for the invitation to come. I'd like to say good evening to all of you, and it's lovely to see like half of the team here in the room with us, so this will be old news to them. But I'm excited to come today to speak about our ongoing fieldwork in the marble quarries on the island of Naxos. The timing of this lecture is a little bit interesting. We just completed the first half of a two-part field season. We just returned over Easter, and we are both working through some very new data and preparing to return for additional documentation in June, in just a few weeks. So that said, I'll apologize in advance if this presentation seems a little bit preliminary and a little bit of a work in progress, but I think that it's an exciting opportunity to have a fruitful discussion about some research that is very much ongoing. Keeping with the theme of the Atlas lecture series, and as Will said, I mean, this is a lecture series that's had some really interesting speakers over the years, we'll be exploring how broader trends in landscape archaeology are influencing our documentation of marble extraction on the island of Naxos, and how this project offers some interesting insight and methodological development in landscape documentation and analysis more broadly. The largest island in the Cycladic archipelago, Naxos has been the scene of a wide range of archaeological research projects following an assortment of methodologies. That's probably not a surprise. While its size, topography, and vegetation profile has made it a poor candidate for the sort of comprehensive, systematic, intensive pedestrian surveys that have become synonymous with Cycladic island archaeology, it has been the home of several methodologically diverse landscape or regional archaeology projects at a range of scales. The earliest large-scale project was a sort of asystematic extensive survey by a Franco-Hellenic team in the 1980s, focused on documenting prehistoric sites on the island's rather gentle and surveyable northwest coastline. More recent surveys on the island have tended more towards systematic, intensive approaches, like the Cambridge Southeast Naxos survey, focused on a coastal strip between the bays of Calados and Panermos, and Norwegian and British surveys at Castro Poliru, and a survey in the Panermos Bay. The Stellida Naxos archaeological project has focused on documenting Paleolithic and Bronze Age material on the Stellida Peninsula, and you can see kind of generally where those projects have tended to take place. While each of these projects produced exceptional insight into particular regions or periods, our picture of the diachronic history, economy, and settlement patterns of Naxos remains somewhat incomplete when compared to the island's smaller, more intensively documented neighbors. We also witnessed some broad trends in archaeological fieldwork on the island, with the more easily accessible west and south receiving considerably more attention versus the more isolated north and east. Fieldwork, especially surveys, have also tended to cluster in the island's more coastline and lowlands versus its more rugged mountainous interior. Examining the locations of archaeological fieldwork of all times documented in the Chronique de Fouilles illustrates this point. Each entry is based on published or presented materials since the 1970s, so while this list is by no means kind of exhaustive of all fieldwork, and that includes some really important rescue excavations on the island by the Greek Ministry of Culture and some surveys as well, it does offer a clear representation of where fieldwork has tended to take place on the island over the past 50 years and the nature of that fieldwork. Come on now. Outside diachronic settlement at Hora, which ranges from intensive prehistoric occupation at Groda to the late medieval stronghold of the Venetian Castro, by far the most well-known excavations have taken place in this island's richly adorned archaic sanctuaries at Iria, Sangri, and the Palatia Island just outside of Hora. Likely dedicated to Dionysus, Demeter, and Apollo respectively, each of these sanctuaries is characterized by the presence of monumental architecture and sculptural dedications that highlight the wealth of the island during the Archaic period. During the 7th and 6th centuries BC, when these sanctuaries were monumentalized, we also witness ostentatious Naxian dedications throughout the Greek world. These are, of course, some of the most well-known objects in the canon of archaic art, from the enormous column of the Sphinx at Delphi to the Lion Terrace, Colossus, and Oikos of the Naxians on Delos. These monuments, both on Naxos and abroad, tend to follow two broad trends. They tend to be kind of significantly larger and more ambitious than contemporary dedications following other local traditions, and they're all proudly made from marble quarried on Naxos itself. The geology of Naxos offered the opportunity, and perhaps even influenced, local sculptors and architects to think big in their compositions. Tectonic activity on the island has pushed marble sources from up to the surface at several points, offering easier access to this resource than on nearby Paros, for example, where subsurface quarries are required to reach veins of marble bedrock. Moreover, Naxian marble deposits tend to offer the opportunity to extract comparatively larger, longer, yet thinner blocks than other sources in the Aegean, a characteristic that almost certainly influenced the attenuated style characteristic of archaic Naxian art and architecture. In addition, mines on the island's north and east coasts are the only source of emery in the Aegean, an abrasive that was not only required for local marble extraction and stoneworking already by the Bronze Age, but a key economic export for the island up until the 20th century. In the Archaic period, Naxian marble seems to have been primarily sourced from two quarries on the island, each quite distinct from one another in terms of their location, their topography, their connectivity, and the characteristics of their bedrock. The first, Melanese, is located some 5 kilometers east of Kouroi, along a small stream that flows toward the west coast of the island, while the second quarry, at Apollonias, is located at the extreme northeast corner of the island. Both quarries are perhaps best known today for the presence of enormous unfinished sculptural monuments that seem to have been abandoned during manufacture or transportation. Melanese is home to 2 colossal Kouroi, which would have measured over 5 meters tall when they were standing, and an enormous 11-meter tall draped and bearded figure remains in situ in the quarry of Apollonias, which would have been the largest, stone sculpture in the Greek world. And Apollonias takes its name from a Horus inscription referencing a sanctuary of Apollo, whose precise meaning has long puzzled epigraphers and led to several kind of competing interpretations. Interest in these unfinished sculptures and the corpus of artifacts and architecture sourced from Naxos has long drawn travelers, scholars, and archaeologists to explore and document these quarries. Antiquities drew Cyriacus of Ancona to the quarries in 1445, where he documented the aforementioned Horus inscription. William Gell in 1811, you can see his drawing of the large Apollonias Kouros here, and the Danish painter Niels Skovgaard, whose name I'm sure I just butchered, spent the summer of 1895 documenting landscapes around the abandoned marble quarries at Melanese. More recently, the work of Greek and international archaeologists has illustrated the presence of marble quarrying and stoneworking at these sites within a complex network of interrelated anthropic features. Just to name a few, fieldwork in Melanese by Manolis Korez in the 1990s offers the first attempt at mapping areas of ancient quarrying systematically, while Vasilis Lambrinidakis has excavated a really interesting complex of archaic structures that points to the presence of sculptural workshops and religious space adjacent to areas of extraction. His work also revealed an extensive multi-phase aqueduct with an archaic foundation. Gottfried Gruben measured a colossal 7.5-meter long block at the southern extent of quarrying at Melanese, which he suspects was intended for the temple of Apollo in Hora, while Georgia Kokourou-Levras undertook some really interesting fieldwork in both Melanese and Apollonias that highlighted the extent of quarrying activities, the range of techniques at both sites, and the broader implications of these practices for the archaeology of the island. Each of these studies raises compelling questions about marble quarrying on Naxos and the integration of stone extraction within wider networks of human activity on Aegean islands more broadly. This became clear when Rebecca Levitan and I visited the islands in 2020, which was our COVID project, so to speak, with the simple aim of using digital tools to restudy and publish some technical drawings of the 3 aforementioned abandoned colossal sculptures. Like those before us, we too left the island after our initial study with more questions than answers. Even with our new examination of the sculptures themselves, significant questions regarding the relationship between the ancient quarries and nearby sanctuaries, the routes by which extracted marble was transported, and the chronology and sequence of quarry use remained unanswered. We knew that we would need to look beyond the sculptures themselves to begin to address these larger issues of facture and context. So those questions were lingering in the back of our mind while we prepared our study for the sculpture for publication, and we came back to the conclusion relatively quickly that additional fieldwork was required to contextualize these monuments and to explore how a deeper understanding of the quarries themselves could offer new insight into sculptural and architectural study. Alongside our colleagues from the Efferate of Antiquities of the Cyclades, we began the Naxos Quarry project, which brings together a diverse team of experts, like I said, most of this room being those people, to answer a series of discrete questions concerning the marble quarries of Naxos, while exploring best practices for the documentation of quarries as archaeological features embedded within complex cultural landscapes. The Naxos Quarry project is under the direction of the Efferate, with Dimitris Athanasoulis and Irini Lagaki as directors. Rebecca Levitan and myself are co-directors and principal collaborators, and the project has been generously funded by the Cycladic Foundation's Petros Goneos Memorial Fund, an Arts and Humanities Research Development Fund from King's College London, and a Reeves Faculty Fellowship from the College of William and Mary. Since large quarries are fundamentally negative or extractive features that challenge traditional archaeological documentation techniques, which are themselves kind of designed for the built environment, we developed a multi-scalar methodology to document evidence for both ancient stoneworking and the reuse of these spaces over time. And this was a kind of accumulation of a ton of contemporary and earlier projects that have attempted to study quarries throughout the Mediterranean. The project integrates our earlier sculptural study at the quarries with other methods, including aerial LiDAR survey, pedestrian fieldwalking, geological sampling, ecological and botanical modeling, and 3D documentation. Together, these tools are fundamentally reshaping our means of collecting and analyzing archaeological data in Cycladic extractive and industrial contexts, offering a new workflow for the systematic documentation of quarries and their place in their network of economic, social, and religious landscapes. Our first season of fieldwork took place over 10 days in February 2024 with a team of 12. And somehow for that project, we also gave a paper like right after we got back in that LiDAR conference. So this is like a theme, I think, where we do fieldwork and then immediately have to say something about it. Maybe. During that time, we aim to undertake most of the more kind of macroscopic and large-scale fieldwork necessary to define the extents of our quarry areas, to collect samples, and to familiarize ourselves with our study areas, aiming to determine best practices when it comes to the more systematic pedestrian research that was to follow. So, Magnus Samdal, Steinar Christensen, and Halvar Ingjerd, who are back there, from the University of Oslo, developed an extensive program of aerial LiDAR and photogrammetric survey of our study areas. This was done in the hopes that we could penetrate the thick vegetation covering both quarries, offering the opportunity to isolate areas of stone extraction and other archaeological features. During this first season, we flew 19 flights with a DJI Matrice 300 equipped with a Zenmuse L1 LiDAR sensor and collected LiDAR and photogrammetry data over a combined area of 200 hectares, which is both of our study areas, at very high level of precision. Topography, vegetation, and archaeological ground traces were markedly different between Apollonás and Melanés. Apollonás displayed lower vegetation, steeper slopes, and more visible worked bedrock, while Melanés presented a more diachronic cultural landscape with a larger variety in vegetation zones, a kind of more traditional Aegean Cycladic survey zone. This introduced our first major roadblock. After we collected this data, we realized that there were no clear workflows that had been developed to classify and process low-altitude drone-based LiDAR in Mediterranean environmental contexts, as most projects in Greece and Mediterranean more broadly have employed higher elevation, more coarse aerial LiDAR data to survey much larger survey areas. To that point, we selected a single zone within our study area in Melanés that presented a representative sample of high and low vegetation, bare earth, preserved archaeological remains, and exposed quarry faces to fly at a wide range of altitudes and data collection parameters, We then process the same data using several industry standard and more kind of experimental algorithms, aiming to pinpoint an optimal workflow for the collection of low altitude LiDAR in the Mediterranean. And that produced, I would say, some pretty interesting results that I think I'm happy, and I'm sure the guys are also happy to discuss further in detail during the Q&A. Based on the results of our aerial survey, we selected areas within each quarry to test intensive field walking and documentation, aiming to identify diachronic evidence of human activity, including agricultural terracing, field walls, quarry areas, sculpture, architecture, and surface ceramics. Both study areas were segmented into 100 by 100 meter survey units, with field walkers spaced 20 meters apart, walking in cardinal directions and documenting all archaeological evidence in a 2-meter wide transect. Each transect was further subdivided into 5 segments of 20 meters, effectively gridding each tract into 25 smaller survey units. Field walking revealed a wide range of archaeological data that highlights human activity in these landscapes from prehistory to the present day. Perhaps the most relevant for the purposes of this talk are the co-presence of an enormous variety in quarrying techniques for block extraction of exposed marble outcrops. These include areas for these include cuttings for splitting wedges featuring spade-shaped triangular and rectangular types, channeling, pointillés, and cuttings for the insertion of posts. In many cases, multiple methods for stone extraction were identified within the same quarry area or even in use on the same block, and several areas exhibited evidence for drilling for modern stone extraction with the use of black powder. Each area of quarrying of 1 square meter or larger was recorded in a project database where it was numbered, photographed, described, and surveyed with an RTK. Fieldwalkers also documented a range of archaeological features associated with quarrying, agriculture, movement, and daily life within these landscapes, in addition to ancient and modern structures, terraces, roads, and artifactual scatters. We documented several large fragments of discarded architecture, including columns, capitals, and ashlar blocks, oftentimes repurposed or reused to construct field walls, terraces, and structures. Fragments of finished and unfinished sculpture were also documented in these same contexts, and 3-dimensional handheld laser scanning with iPhones and iPad Pros we found to be the most accurate and efficient means of recording these objects, forming the basis for future analysis and technical drawings. However, field walking at both Milanese and Apollinace highlighted one of our most surprising results in terms of what we did not document. These landscapes, which present an exceptionally dense, multifaceted evidence for human activity, were almost entirely devoid of pre-modern surface pottery. It's not immediately evident whether this dearth of surface ceramics is due to some sort of taphonomic phenomenon that has obscured ceramics at the site, such as the soil deposition behind more recent terracing, or whether it represents a true lack of systematic occupation at spaces of marble extraction before the early modern period. That said, the small corpus of pottery that was documented during field walking tended to be prehistoric or late antique in date, and most were found in discrete, defined assemblages. All ceramics underwent in situ macroscopic analysis and recording by Florence Liard, documenting fabric, shape, and decoration, and this offered some insight into precise moments of activity in these landscapes during the range of their use. So, while the ceramic patterns left us a little bit puzzled, environmental and botanical study at these quarries proved perhaps more effective than we had anticipated. Torsten Jakobitsch from the Austrian Academy of Sciences selected several study areas within each quarry to establish a representative and comprehensive range of plant species, alongside a full description of each study area. This includes climate, soil pH, and soil hydration. Comparison of these data to broader trends on the island highlighted clear particularities in the long-term environmental and botanical implications of intensive quarrying, abandonment, and the subsequent transition of these spaces into agricultural landscapes. This illustrates how pre-modern extractive industries continue to impact local environments and drive both micro and macro environmental change. More importantly, perhaps, we found that the presence of particular plant species influenced by soil pH reflects the composition of underlying bedrock and quarry debitage in areas where soil accumulation obscures underlying geology. For example, the western limits of quarrying at Milanese are very clearly indicated by the presence of a particular species of heather, whose name I will not try to speak out loud now because it's only a scientific name, which commonly occurs on schist bedrock soils but is absent in calcareous marble soil. This suggests that the integration of geobotanical study within a broader suite of archaeological fieldwork offers the opportunity to define how centuries of human behavior, in this case marble extraction, can affect soil characteristics even today, creating unique microhabitats with rare plant species. Apart from helping identify areas of quarrying, this aspect of study deepens our understanding of quarry zones as biocultural landscapes, highlighting their transformation from extractive sites to refuges of biodiversity. After defining the boundaries of quarrying activity at both Milanese and Apollinasse, Vasily Kianev-Lavie, also from the Austrian Academy of Sciences, undertook a systematic geological sampling program at each quarry. She collected a total of 136 samples for petrographic and chemical analysis using ICP-MS and stable isotope analysis alongside more macroscopic study and thin section analysis. And you can see her there smashing things with a hammer. The use of these methods in tandem allows us to develop complete geological profiles for each quarry and will be employed during future provenance studies of objects documented during our survey and known objects from museum collections. This analysis is still ongoing, but we are excited to present the complete results alongside some sample provenance studies based on these results in September at the Osmosia conference in Ljubljana. If any of you guys are also marble freaks that are planning to attend. Zooming out a bit offers the opportunity to explore another interesting result from our broader landscape study of these areas based on LiDAR ground truthing and intensive fieldwalking. We were able to isolate several stretches of slipways, which are kind of large ramps and routes made from the deposition of soil, marble lapilli, which are fragments of marble that are created from the quarrying process, and other debitage from the marble quarrying areas that were used to facilitate transportation of blocks from the quarries themselves toward rivers and coasts. Rosie Campbell from the VUB and from the University of Cambridge is now working on a systematic map of these routes, highlighting how they have moved and shifted as additional quarrying took place, and exploring how quarry workers reshaped their local topography for the movement of marble. Sculptural study remains a central component of the Naxos Quarry project, and after concluding her study of the three main abandoned sculptures in these quarries, Rebecca Levitan, alongside Nikos Yokas, has pivoted to documenting evidence for their extraction and manufacture. This study is aided by photogrammetry and handheld laser scanning, which allows for the digital manipulation of these objects, the reconstruction of conjectural contexts, and the modeling of movement, transportation, and carving. Accurate digital documentation of these sculptures has proved to be quite important to establish precise measurements and ratios of their carving, as previous attempts to draw, measure, and study these sculptures using, state-of-the-art at that time kind of manual tools introduced quite a bit of error based on the difficult context in which these sculptures find themselves, which is outside in the middle of fields or up against walls in kind of tricky, not ideal study areas, and of course, their large size. These studies are also offering the opportunity to explore some fundamental questions about these sculptures in new light, considering how they were made and under what circumstances they were abandoned. And since she is in the room with us this evening, I'll let Rebecca speak more about this after the talk, if you guys have any questions. The final documentation program during our 2024 field season focused on the documentation of ancient and more recent architecture located in these quarries. Jessica Pega from the College of William & Mary and Jean van den Broek-Parent from the University of Levine focused their attention on restudying and systematically documenting that large 7.5 meter long marble monolithic block located at the southern end of the Milanese quarry. And you can see what that looks like here. While the block has been known to archaeologists since the 1970s, nothing more than some general measurements were available, and neither the local archaeologists nor the owner of the field himself was aware of its precise location. We were able to perform an initial documentation of the object, remeasuring and digitally documenting it in its entirety, and this study also revealed that the block had likely rolled during transportation, placing a much more well-worked surface with some interesting cuttings. You can see two conjectures based on the fact that we can't see the complete underside of the block here, against the ground, leaving the more roughly worked surface exposed to the elements. And seeing that thing spin was probably a terrifying sight. We left our first little field season on Naxos with a great deal of data to work through, several new areas to explore, and a range of questions left unanswered. We did, however, isolate several new areas of quarrying, document the complete range of quarrying techniques in use on the island, and we were beginning to dial in a coherent system and wide-ranging methodology that we think gives us the opportunity to not only shed some light on pre-modern marble extraction on Naxos, but one that is kind of a coherent, low-cost, and easily modified workflow to document pre-modern extractive landscapes of any sort in the Mediterranean. We aimed to build on those results during the first of our 2 short field seasons planned for 2025, just over Easter, completing some fieldwork that had been left unfinished last February, and opening a series of new, interesting avenues of research that became apparent when we were working through our initial results. Marble extraction is still very much alive and well on Naxos, with several international and local companies operating large surface quarries on the hilltops in the center of the island. We realized quite early into our research that there would be no better community to teach us about the realities of both ancient and modern marble extraction on the island than the folks who are undertaking that sort of work today. To that end, we enlisted the help of Yannis Karponidis, who runs his family's quarry near the modern town of Knidaros, and who has himself conducted a range of really interesting interviews with the first quarrymen who began operating on the island again in the 20th century after an almost 2,000-year hiatus of intensive marble quarrying. The NQP team visited the quarry for a day-long crash course in modern marble extraction, where we learned the basics of manual Naxian marble quarrying using iron hammers, picks, and wedges. Things were not much different in the 1950s than they were 2,000 years ago, and were witness to modern methods like diamond saws, drilling, black powder, and hydraulic excavators, which is quite a bit different. Alongside a more direct engagement with contemporary quarry workers on the island, we also began an ethnographic project that focused on the individuals who call the ancient quarries their home. Emmanuel Anevlavis is undertaking a series of interviews with the residents of Milanese, Kouroi, and Apollonas to explore how these quarries have impacted traditional lifeways on the island and what part the well-known abandoned colossal sculptures have played in the development of local identities and mythologies. This research is very much ongoing. In fact, it just began, but I'd like to present one brief anecdote that highlights its potential. When asked about the Kouroi, an 85-year-old lifelong resident of Milanese offered the following story. The story begins. There were 2 kings who both wished to marry the queen of the island. A fight erupted over her hand, and they were both killed in battle. Turning to stone. The queen was bereft and mourned their deaths by ordering that everyone in the town wear black to symbolize her grief, and this led to the town being known as Milanese. So this gives us a little bit of a glimpse of how the local population has engaged with and made meaning of this landscape and the archaeology in these quarries over the recent past. Another new angle, although it's kind of an old angle because this thing has been chewed on for a long time, another new angle taken last month was a careful restudy of the troublesome rupestral Horos inscription located at the northern end of the Apollonas quarry. The southern end, pardon me. The bibliography on determining the precise meaning and broader implications of this single inscription is both rich and varied, and I think was most recently tackled in Sarah Morris's really excellent study of the island's cultic landscape. And interpretations have ranged from the presence of a hitherto undiscovered sanctuary to Apollo, and this would be kind of then limiting the temenos, to the definition of this space as a somewhat sacred quarry for use at a sanctuary of the god, perhaps at Delos, for example. We wondered whether we might be able to tease out a bit more of it by placing it in context with other boundary inscriptions on Naxos and the Cyclades more broadly. And so new research is being undertaken by James Hua from the University of Oxford, who is working through several competing interpretations for the text based on finding out a very concrete definition of its date, the interesting fact that it's been reinscribed and kind of duplicated on the same surface, and you can see a little bit of that in his drawing here, and the presence of a series of compelling glyphs that may be identified as mason's marks at the bottom left. I'm happy to discuss those preliminary results in greater detail after the lecture, but if you have any specific questions, it is 100% better for you to ask him himself, and I can just give you his email address. Fieldwork within the quarries themselves focused on ground truthing potential features that we had identified from our classified LiDAR imagery, offering the opportunity to more clearly articulate a pair of ancient buildings on the slopes of the Apollonas quarry, as well as extending the area of quarrying and slipway construction from the exposed marble hilltop at the south, where the Colossus and the inscription are located, all the way to the coastline at the north. Notably, a few hundred meters from the coast, we were able to study yet another large area of intensive quarrying that was previously undocumented, unphotographed, and kind of unmapped, and under direct threat from villa construction linked to the westward expansion of Apollonas. And you can see the proximity of construction and quarrying here. Undertaking additional botanical study in April versus in February, when we were first there, highlights the importance of doing regional fieldwork in multiple seasons. While springtime made for some particularly bloodthirsty maquis, we were able to identify another reliable indicator plant that seems to clearly identify limits of ancient quarrying activity. The Gallipoli rose, a type of shrub, which is actually quite beautiful, was in bloom during our last field season, and its bright white flowers acted like a spotlight along the borders of quarrying activity in Milanese. So that brief field season sets the scene for our longer period of fieldwork on the island, which is scheduled to take place in just a few weeks in June. During that period, we aim to wrap up a few remaining questions on the various topics raised above, and we'll be bringing students from the US and the UK for field training and to assist in this documentation. Our first order of business is completely cleaning the vegetation and loose soil surrounding the monolithic architectural block in Milanese, and more carefully studying a large area of quarrying nearby just upslope from which it was most likely sourced. This cleaning will allow Jessica Pega and Jean Vandenbroek the opportunity to better understand the characteristics and worked elements of the block in relation to the door jambs at the nearby temple of Apollo at Palatia Island and other monumental Naxian dedications on the island and off. Integrating these results with our ongoing study of the quarry's preserved slipways will allow us to develop a complete narrative for this block and kind of monumental architectural block sourcing more broadly, from extraction and working to transportation and intended destination. I destroyed it. There we go. Likewise, we hope to undertake another campaign of vigorous vegetation trimming at an interesting ancient structure located at the highest point in the Apollonas quarries, just above the exposed face with the Horos inscription. This structure, which is partially visible in this photograph, you can kind of see a bit of the northernmost wall in the corner there, is difficult to interpret at present and may far predate the quarries themselves based on visible masonry and the presence of a light scatter of early Cycladic pottery on the hilltop, one of our few kind of compelling ceramic assemblages. If this proves to be the case, better documentation of this structure will offer the opportunity to explore how existing cultural landscapes were modified or occluded by later extractive behavior. Of course, a date that is contemporaneous with or subsequent to quarrying activity would also offer equally interesting insight into the use or reuse of this space. Just down the hill, James will complete his study of the Horus inscription and has submitted permits to undertake a detailed and systematic restudy of the island's 5th and 4th century epigraphic habit more broadly. If he is awarded the permit, he's slated to digitally document several other rupestral Horus inscriptions on the island and to conduct detailed study of a few contemporaneous objects in storage that we hope will offer some solutions concerning the date, meaning, and broader implications of the Apollonas inscription in its local context and concerning landscape management across the island more broadly. A final look down the road of the Naxos Quarry project places us in the storerooms of the local archaeological museum and its depots, where we hope to take what we've learned from our fieldwork in these quarries themselves to better understand the practice of sculptural and architectural stoneworking on the island. This process, which is only now being planned as the Naxos Archaeological Museum undergoes a complete renovation, reorganization, and recataloging, will include careful object documentation and analysis, provenance study based on the results of our geological sampling, and juxtaposition with objects thought to have been sculpted from Naxian marble in other Greek and international collections. So, now that you know what we're up to, what does this mean for Aegean landscape archaeology and regional fieldwork on the island of Naxos more broadly? As I mentioned at the onset, we aimed to subject our study to as wide-ranging a documentary methodology as we were able, remaining nimble and reacting to our experiences on the ground and the sort of material that we were encountering. This flexibility was necessary considering the landscapes within which these quarries are located are significantly less conducive to intensive pedestrian survey than, say, the range of Cycladic islands that we were tackling on the Small Cycladic Islands project, which Will mentioned earlier and which Alex spoke about in the series last year. The steep topography, dense vegetation, and dearth of surface artifacts made careful analysis and processing of LiDAR and photogrammetry, followed by systematic ground truthing and documentation, a far more efficient way of engaging with the quarries and evidence for human activity from any period within these landscapes. Moreover, while we could not rely on some of the tried and true tools of landscape archaeology, like the presence of surface ceramics offering insight into the date and function of anthropic activity, something that maybe we over-rely on, other methods that were certainly new to me, like botanical analysis, offered key insight in determining the limits of human activity and provided exciting new ways to think about the more long-term environmental effects of human behavior on an island ecosystem. And, you know, the relevance to marble quarrying is something that's extremely relevant on Naxos today. Now that we've started accumulating data and generating some results, we're also excited to begin applying what we've learned to Naxos to quarries that each of us on the team are thinking about through on our other field projects. For example, in my case, several of the islands documented on the Small Cycladic Islands project feature limestone or sandstone quarries or extractive industries of other sorts. And this offers us the kind of opportunity to juxtapose the archaeology of these activities against one another, better understanding the place of those sorts of behaviors on Aegean island economies and Aegean landscape archaeology more broadly. To conclude, I want to point to some of our upcoming publications and presentations in case you'd like to learn more. As I said, we'll be presenting the results of our sampling, our geological sampling at Osmosia in September. We also have a contribution forthcoming on the results of the botanical analysis and another on best practices for classifying drone LiDAR in Mediterranean environments. No idea when that's coming out. We haven't heard anything, I think. Yeah, soon, seriously. All right, okay. How about that? Once we complete fieldwork in June, we'll pivot to an article focusing on the Colossal architectural block and a final report on the project as a whole. Then, finally, we'll set out what we aim to do when Rebecca and I first visited Naxos back in 2020. a new restudy of the 3 colossal sculptures set within the rich, complicated, difficult, and completely fascinating context of the ancient marble quarries on the island. So with that, I'd like to thank you guys all for coming this evening. I'd like to thank again, a lot of thanks to the effort of the Cyclades for directing this fieldwork and for allowing us to undertake it in collaboration with them, to our various financial supporters, and the organizers of the Atlas Lecture Series for the opportunity to share some of our results with you today. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Evan, for this very intriguing talk, while I'm trying to manage the microphone so that our future online visitors can also listen to the Q&A of the talk. You were mentioning how the project started in 2020 as to quote yourself, as a COVID project. You can really see how within just 5 years it has really developed into a really fascinating, intriguing, multifaceted, multidisciplinary, very diverse project. And I think one can only congratulate you and the entire team for a fantastic project, and can only hope for all the best for the future endeavors of the project. But in the meantime, I'm sure there are many, many questions in the audience. While people are still grappling their thoughts, let me start with one of many questions, because the project touches so many aspects of, as you're saying, let's say, a quarry landscape, both ancient and modern. What I personally was always interested in, you were showing the one of the previous maps that Manuel Quest was published about the quarryscapes of Melanes. I was wondering, your survey, your aerial survey, let's say, based now with modern techniques of remote sensing, LiDAR, photogrammetry, and everything. How does that fit with the findings of, I think, 91, at least the publication?
Yeah. The publication date, I think, for the map may not have been until 2020, the first time that I saw it in print. But the fieldwork was done in 91. I would say it's one of those things, and I'd like to talk about mapping, especially in this context, a little bit more generally, as I painfully try to reach back to that slide and burn some time. But we're getting close. I think it is the sort of fieldwork, and I don't know the length of time that he conducted that fieldwork. There it is there. It's a little difficult to read because it's alphabetically annotated on the map and kind of difficult to see. But you can see there the lines represent the kind of field boundaries and a few trends in the geology and hydrology of the area that he encountered during his survey. So he appears, for me, having not spoken with him about this, to have adopted a kind of north-south approach over the eastern side of quarrying activity. So you can see quite a bit, a more dense accumulation of annotation kind of in the center and kind of toward the east. And one thing that the drone survey allowed us to do is to push it a great deal further south and a great deal further west. But the sorts of quarried zones and activities that he was documenting are right on. It's not like we're finding some sort of behavior or some sort of technique that he wasn't able to document. So it's like when you resurvey something when you intensively resurvey something that's been extensively surveyed, I feel like this is a pattern that we often encounter, is you kind of pick up on broad trends through extensive survey, and you're able to kind of quantify and better define and better engage with in a comparative way. Like if we're trying to compare behavior at Milanese with Apollinaris, having something that's a little bit more systematic allows us to begin doing that. But yeah, it's a wonderful thing to build off of as you kind of georeference it and start engaging with how your data shapes up with his data. But it poses another question. I think you can see it here. And this is something that I struggle with, as having made probably as many maps about island archaeology as anybody. I'm struggling to visualize a map of quarrying, versus like a traditional survey fieldwork map. So this is very much in development at the moment. This is why I didn't show any maps of our survey areas, because I haven't landed on a technique. And I would say, this is a technique that is that offers you some data, but it's not engaging in a way to readers, and it's not immediately evident to readers what's happening, right? And I think this is a problem with a kind of quarry-based archaeological field survey map. It's like, how do you map these spaces? So I've been deep diving geological surveys, other quarry projects, from South America, throughout the Mediterranean, everywhere. And it's a tricky thing, but it's wonderful in our case to have something like this fieldwork and the fieldwork of the vast number of people that came before us as something to engage with, because the work that's been done in these quarries has been excellent. It's been excellent for 100 years, but the last 50 years specifically, these places have attracted, some of the most hardworking archaeologists in the Cyclades and the Aegean. So it's a cool place to work. Yeah. Yeah.
That is true.
Yeah.
That is true. In the meantime, any further questions from the audience? I see a signal over there.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was such a fascinating presentation.
Thanks.
And I'm not sure, this question is sort of directed to everyone sort of on the project, as well as you specifically, Evan, but I was really interested, having visited like the Apollonia site myself, just sort of what your guys' thinking is on how sort of common protocol it was to sort of carve these Kouroi in situ. Because it seems to me that although you're getting rid of the weight from the block, the chance of it sort of fracturing or breaking upon transport just seems too risky. So I'm really curious to hear how you all are sort of thinking through this, and whether you think this is sort of common practice or something specific to Naxos.
Yeah, it is common. This is a question that I assume Becky should answer, but I'll give it a first stab. Also, in the Kouroi publication, he has an amazing drawing that kind of shows a step-by-step of how you reduce a Kouros in C2. Fantastic. I didn't put it in the presentation. I regret it deeply, because it is evocative. It's much easier to make that seem cool than a map. But I would say almost it's ubiquitous, the kind of removing as much stone as possible and doing all of that preliminary shaping in the quarry or near the quarry, because it just systematically removes weight and allows for easier transportation. But then you're on that fine line of, I want to take these ankles to as thin as possible, and then the Kouroi, which on Naxos are extremely slender and long, are breaking at the same place over and over. So answering that question, it happened. Sorry. I predicted a coughing fit, and it's happening. I got it. I'll just be chugging. That was one of our primary questions, and it's something that everyone has grappled with, is like, why risk putting these Kouroi in, creating these points of extreme vulnerability in a stone, rather than just getting a block out of there and then working on it on site. And of course, you're leaving X amount of centimeters on the outside and doing the finishing on site. But I think it's purely like economical. Like, how are you going to move it? How many people are you going to employ? How many rollers? How many oxen? Whatever. And I'm sure there's a formula or something, something that was being followed at the time. But I think Nikos or Becky, you guys have thought about this a lot, and it's clearly a problem in antiquity because it keeps happening everywhere, right? I don't know if you guys want to say anything. No comment.
I agree with Evan's comments about the roughing out. Thank you. I agree with Evan's comments about the roughing out process. This is unique to Naxos, and we have lots of comparative for it. But I should say that at Apollonia, that particular sculpture or antenna sculpture, it doesn't have any peers. It's very unique. So what exactly were they thinking? Because of course it's not a Kouros in the traditional sense. It's not a young, idealized man. So we don't have a great, set of comparisons for the practice of trying to excavate an 11-meter long, to extract an 11-meter long statue, and it's only in other cultures that they successfully were able to extract monolithic sculpture at this scale. We don't have a successful Greek example of this scale, so it's a unicorn. So.
How about bearded?
And bearded and wearing, a garment and all of this stuff. Yeah.
Further questions, comments, remarks? All right.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My question has to do with another practical issue connected to what we're talking now. Is the actual interface with the sea.
Yeah.
Since I work with ships and harbors and things like that, loading blocks like that on ships would have been a real problem.
Yeah.
To put it mildly. That is, are you planning? Do you have any data on coastal infrastructure or coastal quarries? I mean, we know that, for example, I'm still at Napoleonas, everything would go to the sea and then be loaded on raft ships, whatever. Are you planning to work on that? Is there anything to work on at the surface? Anything interesting and useful or not? Thank you.
Yeah. So it's one thing that's interesting about these two quarries is their topography and their location is so different, right? One is located inland near a river, and depending on the strength of the river in antiquity, that's a way to facilitate some trade. But as you say, getting things from land onto barges, off of barges, and set up is a problem. But we know from the Roman period or other periods that this is how you move giant granite things from Egypt to Rome, and they sink all the time, right? At Apollonas, of course, you are the Colossus is, it must have been destined to go to the sea, right? And the slipways in the quarry more generally direct movement from the quarry to the coast. And travel to Apollonas by sea was, I think, by far more common until the building of the road a few decades ago than inland travel. And we even have early travelers arriving on Naxos and describing the pains of moving throughout the island by foot or by donkey versus by sea. And at the coast, there is a good deal of ancient material in the water, and there's a good deal of moles and things that we haven't looked at specifically, but that, require work. So, we're kind of working from the quarry outward, and this is what Rosie is working on, is this kind of theme of movement and transportation. But because we're confined to the land permit-wise, we haven't done anything subsurface, underwater, or more broadly. But maybe Halvar, who's done some underwater stuff on Naxos, can talk a little bit if he has any idea of what's going on coastally in general. Panermos is not exactly a stoneworking place, but we have port infrastructure at Apollonas, and we have, and the theory for Milanese is get things to the river and move it there as quickly as possible. So if anyone has any insight or ideas of next steps on how we might do it, maybe we can talk afterward and see what you think. I think we would all be pretty interested to hear what you think.
On that point, that would be extremely interesting. There's also the question that I had in mind as well. It would be interesting to see at the possible anchorage points from a land perspective, see where possible ships could actually land, and perhaps you could even. But this, as you said, it requires a lot. Would be the second or third step I would envision within the larger scheme of the project. But it would be very interesting to see perhaps to experiment with modeling about seaways and winds and stuff, et cetera, where possible. Smaller ships could, just for mainly for transportation routes and everything. That would be extremely interesting. And, talking about movement.
Yeah.
The slipways.
Yeah.
Just in terms of archaeological identification of ancient slipways. What are the features? What are the characteristics?
Yeah, they are clearly defined. The first ones that we saw in the way that we kind of were keyed into looking at this is that the road construction out to Apollonas, the road construction bisected and cut through a bunch of slipways, giving us these really beautiful profiles that we could, these beautiful sections that we could look at. And it's, what you expect. It's areas of irregular topography filled kind of with flat-lying debitage from marble construction. And then you have maybe another slipway on top of it going in another direction as You move things around to get different blocks off here and there. One thing that we don't have is, and this is something that I thought, is this would be like a classic refuse deposit with ceramics and other material. Nothing. I mean, nothing from our from our examination of all of the exposed faces. But then once you've seen them in section and profile, at Milanese, where we don't have any construction, you can begin to identify them based on the composition of the surface from above. You can see debitage and lapilli and other bits of marble quarrying from above, and you can begin seeing that in DEMs and DSMs and stuff to begin modeling movement and thinking about how things, at least at a particular moment, because these are often changing and being moved and remade and reworked and whatever, how blocks are being moved and in what direction they're being moved. And for example, for the really big one, the 7.5 meter long block, there's all sorts of preparatory surfaces and stuff around it for clearly, once again, trying to get as much off as possible. And then it, I don't know, spun and something bad happened and they left, or they ran out of money on the construction project. I mean, what are the interpretations for dropping this thing? But yeah.
But that would be an interesting point to look out when cleaning the block.
Exactly. Yeah. We're excited to see, I mean, what we find at all in cleaning the block. Yeah. It's going to be surface clean. Yeah. Yeah.
Of course, no, but effectively it would be great.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Thank you for the presentation.
Yeah.
I'm interested to know, like, because I saw in one of the forthcoming publications regarding the cultural heritage management. So how do you think this kind of study project can improve the understanding in the heritage studies or also in terms of restoration, conservation works?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the things that we did in that publication, this is the LiDAR publication for mapping, systematically mapping and remapping a landscape to look at how it changes year by year. So you can observe erosion or soil deposition. And the guys just behind you can speak better to this. But one of our case studies was not only this site, but a series of beachside prehistoric mounds in Norway that systematically flying and reflying with LiDAR were able to detect areas of accumulation, areas of loss, and to kind of monitor cultural heritage. Here, these are kind of frozen landscapes for the most part, mainly because there's very little agricultural activity taking place intensively around Milanese in the areas where the quarries are. And at Apollinace, while there is a good deal of stuff happening at the coast, and you could see some construction that's happening directly against quarry surfaces, the area where the Kouroi is itself is a defined archaeological site with nothing taking place, and the agricultural around it is quite static. But as you say, I mean, we only found those or rediscovered and documented those coastal quarry areas and the stuff in between based on the LiDAR study. And it's with that you can kind of say, now, wait a second, there's some quarrying here, there's some construction here. Maybe we should identify this and document it and make sure that we have it for posterity, but also kind of see if we can dictate construction policy, which is a problem in the Cyclades in general, right? As construction is rampant and kind of, you know, impacting the cultural heritage of the region in many ways, not just where a villa is built, but its effect on a watershed or an ecosystem as you cut through terraces and stuff like that. It affects the entire landscape around it. So, yeah, it's a great question. Yeah. Timothy.
Thanks for a great talk.
Thanks, Tim.
When you were talking about using the rows as a marker of the limits of quarrying activity, I just immediately wanted to know, did you actually map individual plants as part of the survey? And as a follow-up to that, I mean, is part of the goal to get the limits of the ancient quarries, the slipways, and the known kind of unfinished blocks kind of hooked up to that network? And if so, are you doing a lot of modeling, least cost path? Are you using a lot of analytically driven kind of post-processing?
Yeah.
Are you doing a lot of tracing, autopsy, confirming things in the field manually?
Yeah, both, right? Both. So in terms of the rows, this is a second water. Look at that. That's a Torsten question, and he was systematically walking and mapping these things, but once he discovers a plant species that's flowering and recognizable visually, you can then return to the aerial photography and kind of identify it from above, right? Once you go and check and do some ground truthing and make sure you're on, but you can really see where the geology changes at a contact point, because there's the soil pH is thus that there's very little kind of bleeding over in one. There's of course a little bit, but it's been for me kind of, that's something, a tool that I've never used before, right? Yeah, I mean, and I think like survey archaeology in general, we've not been so keen in having that be like a primary analytical method. And for the other, yeah, modeling, that is what's happening now, especially with Rosie, and that's something she's done quite a bit of. So I think it's for sure least cost paths, for sure hydrological modeling, and another thing to grapple with is rampant construction of terracing in the 20th century, which is one of these things that may be impacting surface visibility for artifacts, but also, fundamentally changes the nature of the topography. So what she has found is that actually the super high resolution LiDAR and photogrammetry that we're taking to identify areas of like small exposed areas of surface treatment that we can then go document, that is obviously like way too computationally intensive and introduces an enormous amount of error for these kind of broader landscape scale questions. So she's actually taking that data, reducing the resolution significantly, and then creating kind of more generalized models based on areas identified in ground truthing. So it's like a little bit, you go really high resolution, really low resolution, and then, you go look for it. And that's the best part. So, yeah. He's on the project. How can you? Oh, you.
Well, thank you very much. I'm just wondering about this quarry landscape and what elements you put into that, because you haven't been talking that much about the occupation. Where did these people live? You talked about some structures on the Apollonas, but what do you think about the dwellings, the houses? Where are they?
Yeah. I mean, we can start from the early modern period, and you have seasonal farm occupation. This is not for the quarrying, but within the landscapes in the 20th and 19th centuries. Tons of farmhouses, tons of livestock pens, all made out of quarry debitage or marble or bits of architecture and all sorts of stuff. So they're really interesting. Ancient structures are a little bit more elusive. At Apollonas, we have that one that needs cleaning and identifying. We also have in the dead center of the quarry area, in an area that is completely surrounded by quarry activity, a big in situ threshold block with a pivot and a ton of rubble in the area. And the question is, what sort of building is that? Also completely covered with vegetation and some preserved walling. In that one, I mean, to my mind, there's no material around it, but I've, having documented a lot of buildings in non-Cycladic islands, it looks kind of more late antique than ancient. So the best evidence for real contemporaneous occupation contexts that are contemporary with quarrying activity are things like, this is not, the question is, what is the space, sanctuary or something else? Is the sanctuary just outside of Milanese, which has a ton of contemporaneous, both sculpting activity or unfinished works like that unfinished Sphinx that you saw earlier, and religious space and boundary stones and the sort of activity that you would expect from a sanctuary or a kind of complex of mixed purpose sanctuary and occupation and sculpting all happening in the same place. And that's, I don't know, 200 meters from one of the Kouroi. And at Apollonas, rescue excavations in between the quarry and the main town have documented a good deal of kind of later Roman pottery and early Bronze Age pottery. You know, I'm not as familiar with the kind of unpublished ephemeria stuff from the area, but I suspect a more careful look outside of the areas of the quarrying starts to get one into questions of occupation, contemporaneous occupation. Yeah.
Any further last remarks, questions, comments? If that is not the case, it's perfect.
It's not a question.
Yeah.
I congratulate you for this project. I am working for more levels. As you know, I have worked on this subject in 1992, and I am glad, I'm happy that a systematic survey will take place now, and because then I was too forced in feet, because I have walked the whole district with my husband and a friend of mine. This was the team.
Yeah.
And we have all these drones with all these modern means, and really it's very important to find out if we have a gear roads, also the transport roads. You know, of course, that in Foreigners we have a part of the cave, the ancient cave, possibly.
Yeah.
It's not proven, but it's most probable. And you know that to the north there is another place with a quarrying. We have written about it with my team, and there is a big. I have understood if you have spoken about it, because sometimes I don't understand very well what you say in the course of the speech. So I'm very glad that you do this work to find out the exact district that this quarries have been were there, and we have all these fine works. So good luck.
Thank you. Yeah, and yeah, I mean, your work is obviously at the foundation of this project, and it was the first thing that we were like kind of obsessively reading and obsessively kind of visiting these places and trying to understand. As you, it's like, how do you do this? And doing it with a few people, like with the Kouroi map, right? It like gives you a sense, and then you want more. So what do you do? And then we're trying to do it. Yeah. But drawn by the same thing that drew you there, I'm sure. Yeah. So, thank you.
This speaks to Tim's question about close autopsy versus using analytical tools, because so much of our close autopsy was informed by observations that you made, and even things where there was vegetation completely obscuring buildings, you saw them, so we saw them through analytical tools, but you just saw them visually through close autopsy. So it's very impressive to see how two different means can bring you to the same result. So we were very thankful for your work, and also happy that our work was building on that through other methods as well.
We are very happy that you do this.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Very important. It's very important to find out new elements and new theories.
Yeah.
And so on.
We'll show you more stuff. Yeah, we're excited. Yeah.
The perfect opportunity to really congratulate
Thanks.
you and the entire team for fantastic results, and also wish you all the best, not luck, but success, because I think that's an obvious for all future endeavors of the project. And I'm also very happy to have seen all these fantastic images of fantastic weather on Greek islands, which slowly brings us to the Greek summer, because actually this talk tonight was our last lecture before the summer break. Unfortunately longer summer break this year, but we will be back fully energized back after we all return from our various summer projects and whatever we might be doing in the summer. But that being said, let us all thank Evan and team for this fantastic talk, and really wonderful discussion. Thank you once more.
Thanks.